Welcome to the Tintin podcast, where we explore the adventures of Tintin, one story at a time. Whether you're a long-time fan of the books, or you're just discovering the world of the border porter, this is the place for you. We'll be taking a deep dive into Hergé's iconic series, unpacking the stories, art, historical context, and everything else that makes Tintin a global phenomenon. Each episode will explore one of Tintin's adventures in detail, with plenty of trivia scattered right through. I'm Maran, and today we're heading into the shifting sands of the Middle East to check out a tense desert-swept adventure of political intrigue, mysterious explosions, and a rising thread that pulls Tintin straight into the heart of global chaos in Land of Black Gold. Joining me today is Greg, who wasn't part of our trip to South America, but he's as geared up as ever for Arabia, aren't you, Greg?
Absolutely.
Louisa, who's fresh off our special in the Women in Tintin.
Hi there.
Loki, who's joined Tintin in this part of the world before, in Cigars of the Pharaoh and the Crab with the Golden Claws.
Hi.
Also from Down Under and new to the pod is Ben, who has been a fan since the age of 7 and has even written a thesis at university about the role of the natural world in these adventures.
Hi, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
And I'm sure our listeners remember Rohit from the 7 Crystal Balls pod and the only member who's currently in a Land of Black Gold. Assalamu alaikum.
Hey, alaikum salam.
So, Louisa, Land of Black Gold, 32 years in the making, 3 different versions. If you're going into this blind, can you make out that it's a tale that's been baked and rebaked several times over?
Well, I'm the right one to answer that question because I always went into this story blind. I read it and reread it so many times as a kid that you can see in my copy, it's taped together, literally. But it does make sense in hindsight that it enjoyed a lengthier process of development. There's something about it. I don't know if it's the exquisite dynamics, the time taken to perfect it, or just that he took more consideration of the language, the art, the diversity. But there's definitely a genuine feel to it, like the interactions between the characters. So yeah, it's both fast and exciting, and it's quite wordy as well. But it doesn't fail in any way or falter. So slow cooking over time, it's a very effective method for Hergé, and all the comedic timing is at its absolute peak.
Spoken like a true Tintin fan there, I think, Louisa, just reading it for what it is. And I'd have to say the same. At the end of the day, it's Tintin. We love it. We just enjoy it for what it is. But nonetheless, I guess it does jump around in stylistic elements a bit as well. We see that humor with the Thompsons in their Citroën, which I think is a 1920s vehicle, maybe the Citroën 5CV on page 1. And it reminds me a lot of Tintin in the Congo and Tintin in the Soviet Union, similar kind of vehicles that we see back then. So it's got elements of those first 10 to 15, 20 years of Hergé's adventures. But then we start to see other stylistic elements that come later in the series as well. The plot seems to mature a little bit too. So by the final pages of the 62-page volume, the line work, the visual composition, it's much more noticeably refined. I guess as Captain Haddock says, who enters right towards the end there, it's quite simple, but at the same time, pretty complicated.
A pretty complicated plot by Tintin standards for sure. Would you say Hergé was ahead of his time circa the first version in 1939 when he sat down to pen the story about what is basically an oil conflict in the Middle East?
Ahead, yeah, and he was in some regards. I guess, it comes down to once you find oil, that means money. Money means power, means greed, means a lot of things. So anyone who's got a chance to get to that oil, why not? So hence all the nations being at war there. Sounds like a fantastic volume. I might have to look that one up. But I think around this time too, it's the early 20th century, 20s, 30s, 40s. We see a lot of stories like this in films and literature, books, all kinds of stories about desert adventure, espionage, strategic power, shifting politics, and hungry mongrels trying to get the oil. We've just had the First World War. Naturally, you need oil to make that the war machine work. And then now we're moving into the Second World War at the start of publication here. So, we start to see a lot of stories set in those areas. Lawrence of Arabia, Agatha Christie's Death on the Nile, Fessinger's Arabian Sands. And I think this story has ties to Cigars of the Pharaoh and those kinds of ideas. I mean, Hergé never really just set one story in the Middle East and then gave up. He's gone back time and time again. So it's obviously a place that is very well situated for a good story.
Well, I think just still touching on oil, you talk about it as leading to an oil war with World War II, but Hergé had already touched on the oil war in The Broken Ear, where the Grand Chapo War breaks out, which is for oil and prompted by the oil companies. But I also think, like, with the abolition of the caliphate at the end of World War One, which in some ways, like as Ben touched on, started this kind of scramble for oil, that made the region that much less stable. And there was all that kind of, he touched on, Ben mentioned Lawrence of Arabia, and you had all these, smaller caliphs and sheiks and, trying to seize power in different ways, and all supported by different foreign companies. So it all feels very similar to, it feels like an expansion of that idea that he touched on in The Broken Ear, where you get kind of 2 pages of an oil war for Western powers.
And all these years later, Rohit, not much has changed in the Middle East, has it?
Oh, unfortunately, not much has changed. I mean, we've yet to find a suitable replacement, a suitable and a sustainable replacement for oil. And till that happens, I think this region will continue to be volatile. And I don't see it changing in the next, at least in our lifetime, that we'll make any kind of quantum leaps to replace oil completely. So unfortunately, I think the way things are right now, it will continue to be the same.
It's interesting, if I can just add one thing, to how well this mirrors what they call the scramble for Africa. Once the African continent was opened up and resources were found, it was just a race by, every major power in the world to grab what they could as quickly as they could before anyone else could. So you had a very close mirroring of that in an area that no one cared about previously because it was literally just a desert, is now the most important geography on the planet for people to try and get a piece of. So,
although we must point out that while this book is set in the Middle East, there was a bit of moving of the furniture in between whiles. By the time the 71 version came around, Hergé transplanted the events of the story from Palestine to this fictional emirate of Kemet, later also seen in the Red Sea Sharks. We've been in fictional land before with The Broken Ear, Greg. Thumbs up or down this time?
I think, the more I learn how much the books were changed over time, again, I never really examined this stuff from other than just reading the books, and so taking a closer look and seeing how the stories have changed, the locations have changed. I don't know. I have a real question in my head whether it's beneficial, because again, these are supposed to be children's books, but they were, again, intended to be, in addition to fun and adventurous, to be educational, at least in the beginning. We don't like what they were trying to be educational about necessarily, but they were intended to be educational. So I don't know. Does it make more sense to use a fictional land to tell the story, or should we really place it in the real world so that, kids start to understand where conflicts arise from? Maybe this is a good way, but I don't know. I haven't come up with an answer for that. I know my preference would be is more of a realist. Hey, this happened. This is real. We should be talking about it. But again, taking into account young people reading this, I don't know. So I think for himself, it was smart. Just get away from the whole Palestine Zionist issue. At the time, it was more considered that, especially the Irgun and that. So, yeah, I think you probably, especially the where the birth of this series comes from, which was indeed a highly anti-Semitic fascist organization, self-admitted. So, you got to be careful.
Which side of the fence are you on, Lucky?
Well, by the time we get to we have now, which is the third version of the story, which has no references to Zionism, kind of World War II and the Holocaust are really over. And the kind of sands have shifted in the Middle East significantly, and they've kind of settled with Israel being kind of the good guys, and the Arabs at that point, particularly in the eyes of the Western world, being seen as often the bad guys. But reading that original, the mistaken identity Zionist plot is really interesting. It's actually really, I think, unique in the Tintin canon. Like, Hergé reused so many tropes, but this is actually something that he doesn't use again with that case of mistaken identity. So it's a real shame that it has to be dropped. But I think Hergé had already faced accusations of anti-Semitism, and the world, particularly by 1971, had significantly changed. I think reading back over those original ones, he's quite explicitly critical of the Ergun, which was this kind of Zionist terrorist movement, and their role in kind of the factionalism that was engulfing the Middle East then. But I think it makes sense that he drops this plot given the context of the time. But I think it means that as we kind of read the story and the 1971 version now, it's lost that layer of intricacy by simplifying it into a fight between two Arab factions. And it does feel like it kind of in some ways adds to that European lens of kind of observing foreign conflicts rather than showing how actively involved Europe was.
Rohit, I'm sure you agree too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it would be nice to have a story centered on that conflict, the Israel-Palestine conflict. But yeah, given as it is even it's still a very big flashpoint even today. I think he did well to drift away from it back then. And like Greg pointed out, it seems to be a good business decision. Methuen, I think, asked him to do that. And since the British were directly involved with the whole Israel-Palestine, the partition and the British mandate for Palestine, I think it was a good idea in the end that he finally just drifted clear of it and kept it simple.
And let's keep it simple on our pod after that dose of history. You're the one in Arabia right now, so why not give Hergé a score for his depiction of what you see around you?
I think, it was a little more subtle. It was not as pronounced as Congo. He did, show some stereotypes over there compared to his later books. But otherwise, largely having been here about a year, I think he got it mostly correct, considering the fact that, you had limited access to information, not like we have it today. And it didn't feel, poorly researched at any point. It was good. And he got it right for the most part. In my eyes, I think he got it right. The skin tone, their traditional outfits, even their religious practices or symbols. I think he got it pretty good, pretty right, on point.
And what did you think from a couple of oceans away, Louisa?
Well, I was a white kid reading this, so to me it was seemingly authentic and impressive. But since I lacked that home front perspective of somebody actually from Saudi Arabia, I hesitate to make that judgment. However, I was always tickled by at least the inclusion of Arabic, especially the part where Snowy is proven to have multilingual understanding, and he says, "Don't listen to him, Tintin, not even in Arabic," which always cracks me up. So, as an adult, I went back and I translated the Arabic using technology because I am not like Snowy. I'm not an expert of multiple languages. So I was fascinated to actually read some of these translations, like when Bab El Air is cursing. And I'm not going to, I could try to read it, but what it means is, God's curse, you son of a dog, may God curse your father. I want her, meaning the airplane, to be shot down, which is a very clever and realistic bit of slander. So I think that was quite well done by Hergé. And I also admire Tintin using some proper Arabic words for things like kamsin, I don't know how to pronounce it, but for the sandstorm. I did, however, wince a little bit, not only at that minstrel type depiction of the cook on the ship, which has a bit of a Congo feel, maybe a little more progressively rendered, but also when somebody says inshallah, and even an American like me knows it's supposed to be inshallah, inshallah. I'm probably saying that wrong, but at least I can see the spelling is it's not inshallah. I don't know what that would mean. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't find it wholesale offensive, but I might not be the right person to make that judgment.
Fair call. And Loki, since you made it a habit of building a streak of Middle Eastern adventures, it's probably the case that every next one is visually better than the last. Would you agree?
Oh, I don't know about that. I feel like the artwork, particularly in the towns, feels a little bit neater, but it feels very compressed. Like there's less kind of liveliness. So the world feels kind of less rich and alive. I think the scenes on the ship are really good. They have this really high level of technical detail, which he's going to take to the next level in the upcoming Moon stories. And that kind of adds to a level of immersion. But no, I think the towns in the Middle East in general are not as well rendered as they are in Crab with the Golden Claws. And then I think he strikes kind of the perfect balance later in Red Sea Sharks. This is kind of halfway between that liveliness and perfection of Red Sea Sharks and not quite great at either.
Although, Greg, there is a panel rather early on where we see Tintin, hold your breath, doing some journalism. First time since the Soviets. Did you pick up on that?
Yeah, again, we see snippets here and there of where Hergé seems to remember. Oh, right, he's reporting. He's got to do some reporting. But yeah, I mean, again, I think as a kid, that's not even the stuff I was even paying attention to anymore. I probably, if you had asked me at the time what was Tintin's profession, I would have come up with reporter, but that wouldn't have been my first, my first thought. He is definitely much more of an adventurer and like a mystery solver. He's too curious. But I always found it funny how, he's just a random reporter, but he can walk into offices and they make him, the lead of the secret mission to determine who's blowing up the oil refineries and cars and stuff. So yeah, no, I just always loved that part of things with Tintin.
Louisa, Greg, and I are seeing things, are we?
Yes, you're both seeing things, I think, because, and I will argue that he is a criminal investigator. And I have a degree in criminal investigation because of Tintin, partly, because he is obviously being a forensic detective. There would be like a pad in his hand or a tape recorder if he's a reporter, but if he's a detective, he's going to try to put this civilian at ease to get information from him. So that coupled with his espionage, the fact that he tells Snowy he desires to get to the bottom of things, these are indicators that his profession rather, should have been that of a criminal investigator. I mean, consider how he delineates these forensic findings behind Abdullah's kidnapping. Just moments afterward, he's like, "Oh, the tire tracks there, this shred of cloth here, these footprints." So I wish personally that Hergé had just shed that reporter label and made him a proper gumshoe. I mean, compared to Thompson and Thompson, he's a pretty good detective, except for the fact that Tintin has atrocious trigger discipline. He calls the gun a toy, and then he fingers the trigger the whole time like it actually is a toy. We'll overlook that because for the most part, I argue he's in forensics.
You mentioned Abdullah there. He does enter the script like a wrecking ball. What did you make of his role in the story? I suppose you either love him or hate him.
Abdullah is my favorite character. I think he's just such a treat for the reader. He's everything Tintin and Haddock need to keep them humble with these basest annoyances of any parent. And now that I'm a mom, it's so obvious that Hergé had very real interactions with a very real child. And he has Abdullah mimic child behavior so spot on. And it kind of gives you a hint as to why Hergé was unable to play father to the orphan that his wife wanted them to adopt in real life. From how easily he pens these childlike behaviors, it's clearly he must have been elbowed in the mouth, screamed at in the ears, and ditched dangerously by a tantrum having bundle of joy one too many times, and could not spank it out of the kid the way Haddock and Tintin both try to do. I mean, we've never seen Tintin like this before. Until Abdullah, we would never visualize Tintin shaking a kid ragefully, or fantasizing about tying him up before he beats his butt into submission. As a parent, I would never spank my kid, but I am just as biased as the sheik about his little lambkin, his little peppermint cream, his chickadee until he's mad, and then this chair becomes a wretched little centipede. It's just too good. It's unlike any other character introduced in Tintin, and quite possibly, I would argue, the most realistic child character ever drawn. I could fully see any kid playing train on the tracks or wanting to stay put with his kidnapper. And as a kid, I used to lose my mind over, oh, what a lovely accident when the car's on fire, which is just next level crazy. And it always makes me laugh out loud. It's just so absurd. Hergé must have been chuckling when he put that in, as much as there is some resentment toward children. And I will say, Abdullah saves himself with his sneeze dust, his itching powder, and the ink gun at the end there. He saves another life, eh? And it's also kind of like socialist and sociopathic how he pranks everybody across the board, no matter what side they're on. I don't know. And some of my favorite bits of Abdullah are how he calls Haddock blistering barnacles and is attached to him, even though Haddock is like the opposite of a kid-friendly character. And and Tintin, we never see Tintin brought to those levels. Like when he agrees that he should be impaled, he says, "Good idea." To Abdullah. Abdullah says, "My father would have you impaled. Good idea." It's just very realistic for conversations with kids. Like, I'm gonna go live on the moon. Okay, good idea. Yeah, okay, or whatever. I just think he's really the best addition of a character Hergé could have dreamed up. He's by far the most frustrating individual that Tintin and Haddock encounter, despite having the most frustrating friends ever. A fully deaf calculus and Thompson who have like half a brain cell between them. So Abdullah for the win. Talk about the ultimate anti-hero.
So, criminal investigator Louisa is keeping him out of prison. What about you, Rohit? Would you have liked to see more of Abdullah beyond the little we get in the Red Sea Sharks?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, to add to what Louisa said, even I think he's my favorite character. He's probably the best addition that Hergé introduced, in the middle of the series. And yeah, I would definitely have liked to see more of him because, like she said, there's no one that has frustrated them, more. Considering that he's just a child, but he really gets to both of them, including Tintin, who's usually so patient and calm and everything. But he got to Tintin as well. So yeah, I would have loved to have seen more of him.
Could I just give the opposite? So if you be in agreement of loving Abdullah, I'll give you the opposite. I don't care for the character. I think Hergé took him a little too far. But the more that I thought about it, I think it might be me actually that's the problem. And I just had an experience with a family overseas one time where we were living for the summer. And these kids were so poorly behaved. I mean, they were nightmares. And I was around the time I would have been reading Land of Black Gold and things like that. And I think I absolutely put all of my my desire for vengeance on Abdullah. But he's definitely an effective literary device, that's for sure. So I just didn't particularly care for him.
Well, maybe in that sense, he actually worked because he came in like a wrecking ball, and maybe if he felt like he was a wrecking ball, maybe then he worked.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I think that's part of the infuriating part about it is we all probably know or could think of someone that fits Abdullah's model, if not in TV or whatever, that it's the parent that's really at fault. So, oh, absolutely.
Somebody else without too much affection for him is a certain J.W. Muller, first seen since the Black Island. Lucky if Hergé had to bring back a past villain, why Muller? Won't Alan or Rastapopoulos, both with past desert pedigree, fit the story better?
I'm a Muller lover, but full disclosure, Muller is my grandmother's maiden name. So whenever I see him, I do think, maybe he's a long lost cousin of mine, which is maybe not the best. But when Hergé started writing the original version, The Black Island was only 2 volumes prior. So Muller's a much more, even though it feels for us as we read now, a a huge leap between stories. It was actually quite close. But then I also think Muller was inspired by the Scottish-born forger, or kind of Scottish national forger, George Bell, who was a supporter of the Nazi Party, who used forged currency to attempt to destabilize the Russian ruble throughout World War II and possibly prior. So the idea of Muller as this kind of freelance spy and agitator and foreign agent, I think fits much better than Allen. I don't think Allen, when the first volume was written, I don't think he'd appeared in any stories, because I know he's added later to Cigars of the Ferret. But I don't think he's in the original version. So when the original Black Gold was written, I don't think Allen existed yet, because he doesn't chronologically first come in until Crab with the Golden Claws. And then Restropopoulos is too much of like a greedy capitalist. Muller seems to be working for somebody else. He's kind of like this evil middleman, whereas Restropopoulos is a bit more kind of mustache twirling, ridiculous villain. Muller's much more realistic, and yeah, that kind of spy, agitator, kind of foreign agent, I think really suits the story and the key themes of it, about kind of colonialism and greed and taking power over these countries for resources.
Yeah, I think Muller has a presence that perhaps Rustopopoulos' cartoonish like fake features don't really have the same kind of presence. There certainly has a great character, but Muller has the evilness, the kind of realistic kind of presence on the page, and you know that if you met him in real life, it wouldn't go down too well.
Unless you're Abdullah, I suppose. Anyhow, while we don't have Derek with us today, from an answer up front, our listeners have probably figured that you like your cars. And I see from your notes here that you made some pointers on the cars and the planes in this book. Take it away for us.
Yeah, well, I think the first car that we see right on page 1, might even be panel 2 or 3 or something, the Thompsons are driving around what I believe to be a Citroen, and that's, I think, a 1920s vehicle. But then, of course, as I said before, this has a crazy publication history, and so later on they're driving around the desert in a red Jeep that wasn't manufactured until about 1938, 39, possibly even the 1940. So we're seeing two different cars, and at the time when Hergé first started planning and penciling this adventure, we don't actually see this vehicle in the real world. That vehicle, the Jeep, only comes later, and I think the same too with the Emir's plane. I'm not quite sure what aircraft that is. It looks like a Spitfire at first glance, but I believe it to be something else. And again, that didn't come out until later on. So we see a huge publication here, history, which is a little bit all over the place, but it adds to the fun. We can certainly see Hergé's research going into the depths here.
Even the little toy car is so well done. And I just wanted to point out that Snowy he gets behind the wheel of that little toy car. I'm pretty sure that's the only time we see Snowy behind the wheel. It's just so precious.
I'm not a cars person, so I couldn't. You've named several cars, and to me they're all old cars. But I think one of the great things about the cars in this is like that final chase scene just is extremely cinematic. And like I kind of talked about how maybe the artwork wasn't quite at its peak in this story, but I think those action scenes, the car chase through the desert, they really make up for any kind of other lackluster elements in the book. It's really exciting, and the way he draws those cars so realistically really adds to that really beautiful, really intense scene.
I think that last car in that scene, in that chase scene, was a German car, from what I understand. Which make and model entirely, I'm not too sure, but that totally matches Dr. Muller as the evil getaway guy.
Airline pilot Rohit, you wanted to come in on the plane there.
Oh, no, I just wanted to agree with him. It is a Spitfire, the British Spitfire. And yeah, it was, I think, in the late 1930s was when it was produced. So it was kind of around the right time that it was introduced in the book as well.
Greg, while Ben touched on their wheels there, would you like to offer a word on the drivers themselves? I'm referring to the Thompson Twins, who arguably clocked up the most miles in this story, even if they were driving around in circles.
Yeah, well, I do want to say the Thompsons in this episode is probably my favorite, and this is one of my favorite kind of adventure Tintins, more so than some of the others, where there's that great interplay between the tension, the danger, and the humor. I think Hergé uses it so well in this, as opposed in the past where he would just sort of sprinkle in some humor. It seems like it's a much more thought out approach to balancing what is a pretty hectic topic for kids, impending war. We're sitting here as adults talking about it, but I always try to think about my mind frame and as a child when I was reading this, as a young boy just reading these, so I thought that interplay with the Thompsons was really important, and I think the fact that again that it is such a caricature is directly at that vision of who the English were at the time, or the British were at the time. Again, yes, that stiff upper lip, that constantly composed, there's you never let them see you sweat kind of thing, and obviously that can never be true. But I think this again is just enables Hergé to really take this to the next level of caricature and humor.
How about you, Loki?
Yeah, I'm sometimes a bit of a Thompson skeptic, but I love the Thompsons in this story. I just think they're fun and funny. Like, my 2-year-old loves this book in particular of all the Tintins, and I think his enjoyment is really kind of evenly split between Abdullah, who's very cheeky, and like that physical comedy of the Thompsons. It's where you see that this was a story written for children, and there's so much fun and joy and kind of, that physical comedy in them, and the burping bubbles and the crazy hair at the end are just a massive hit, I think, for any age.
And Rohit, between the Thompson twins, Abdullah, Muller, the Sheikhs, and Tintin himself, the story had enough of a spark. So what really was Haddock doing there? He turned up out of nowhere, offers no real explanation, and doesn't really move the plot. Would the story have been better off without him?
Yeah, actually, that's the only part of the book which I find a little bit of a downer for me, because he appears out of thin air at the exact same time that Tintin needs him, and that too in a bunker. So I felt like, it warranted an explanation, and we didn't get anything. Hergé left it kind of open-ended. So, that felt a little bit off for me. I mean, that's my one sore point with the book.
But I think too, there's something really essential about the character development here too. If we take all the albums as a kind of work as one whole, then we first meet Captain Haddock when he's basically pretty damn useless in Crab with the Golden Claws. If you could say it's like the desert, it brings their friendship together because they have to struggle through no water, no whiskey, no food, no nothing. And they've only got each other to get through to the desert. And by the end of their experiences in the desert, well, they're now friends. So in some ways, the desert in the Crab with the Golden Claws, I think, solidifies their friendship together. And now we see in another desert adventure, you might say, Captain Haddock doesn't seem to be there because he's had naval orders to go sailing somewhere else. But then right in the spur of the moment, when everything seems against Tintin, is locked in this prison cell, and suddenly, bam, Captain Haddock's back. It's almost like now the roles are switched, they're reversed. So rather than Captain Haddock being in the hold of a cabin on board a ship, not able to really go anywhere, almost like a prisoner, now we have Tintin, who's the prisoner, and Captain Haddock comes to his rescue. And I think it's a really neat way to add Captain Haddock in when the text was being published later on. But I think it's also a way for Hergé to bring out some of the character development for both Tintin and Captain, their friendship as well.
If it's cameos that Hergé was going for, Louisa, you've been with us long enough to remember the first appearances of many of these characters, like Castafiore and Oliviera de Figuera. Better executed than Haddock, you'd argue. Of course, in Oliviera's case, it was more than just a passing appearance.
Yeah, I mean, Castafiore, we can easily imagine playing on the radio and assaulting Tintin's ears no matter where on the globe he might be. So I find Castafiore well utilized for that purpose. It's comedic and realistic enough considering the global medium of radio and the popularity of opera at the time. Oliviera, I hesitate to assume this a natural element of his, what he calls a god-forsaken land. Because didn't we last find him in or near Egypt, right? So it seems anywhere desert-esque Tintin ends up, he's likely to run into this salesman, which is obviously a bit too odd for real life. But fortunately, I think Oliviera makes his unlikely appearance worthwhile. This distractive storytelling device he employs is such a clever way of sharing his personality's inherent value to the plot. This mastery of long-winded fantasies that has all these surrounding townsfolk in tears over total BS. So at this point in Tintin and Snowy's adventures, I'm inclined to actually enjoy these delightful surprise reunions when in less developed feeling issues, it was just too forced and random. Olivier is so quickly entertaining and instrumental. We don't even linger on the fact that he's impossibly relocated conveniently. And I wanted to throw in about Haddock being in there. I think that Haddock being there is the setup for a cheeky joke, obviously. But as a kid, it went right over my head that it was illogical just because Haddock was so intent on explaining his reasons that I was like, oh, well, clearly his reasons must be so credible. But as an adult, his appearance ascends into absurd hilarity as intended, that he would never get to explain it and how it makes no sense. So I do like to mentally knit together illogical parts in a satisfactory way. So if I saw somebody produce like a rational series of events explaining how had it got to that point, I'd happily read that. Otherwise it sort of does veer into ridiculously unlikely territory, the same as Oliviera being there.
I was just gonna say, I wondered if the character of Olivier de Figueroa, is that how it's pronounced? Was the basis for the Salah character in Indiana Jones. He reminds me so much of Indy's friend when they're digging, and he's the storyteller that keeps the Germans busy. He's the kind of the fixer guy who knows the region. And he's just instrumental to the success of this. It's not a massive role, but it's definitely something that's needed. And so and even the personality is just exactly the same. If you folks know the character I'm talking about in Indiana Jones, so the parallels between the two of them are really striking for me. And that's why I think I like that character so much. I just love that Salah character too.
So, Greg, really interestingly, the movie The Man from Rio, which is like this French action adventure movie, was basically inspired by Tintin. And the director said, I want to make an adult, grown-up version of Tintin. And then Steven Spielberg became obsessed with that movie, watched it 10 times, and then went on to make Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is like the template for modern action adventure movies. So I feel like you're exactly right.
Maybe my Salah Salah theory is on potentially.
Yeah, could be.
You know, we can't wrap an episode of the Tintin podcast without hearing from our listeners. Louisa, somebody asks, and I quote, "Camels I know, but are there really horses in a desert, or is that a work of fiction like the vivid mirages?"
I'm a horse enthusiast, so this question I thought was quite funny because the Arabian horse is one of the world's oldest breeds. The Arabian horse shaped the Bedouin culture. They were absolutely instrumental to Bedouin culture to the extent that they even slept in tents with their Arabian horses. And Arabian horses define the equestrian world of endurance to this day. So the tribes of ancient Saudi Arabia were wholly dependent on the horse, not the camel. So I thought that was funny. We would not have a culture anywhere near what we have in Saudi Arabia if it weren't for the speed and the endurance and the beauty of the Arabian horse. I mean, it absolutely an instrumental part of the culture.
The Muslim expansion of the 7th, 8th centuries was entirely driven. The speed of it was driven largely by, horse warfare. And so, yeah, no, they're just a long story part of the history of that entire region and, that whole part of the world.
Loki, do you think Hergé missed out on the opportunity by not concluding the intriguing Baudelaire side plot? Or were you invested in other parts of the story by the end of the book?
I think much like the rivalry between Tapioca and Alcazar, it's kind of better left in the background. When Tintin becomes kind of overly involved in the bigger political movements, like he does in the Picaros, it kind of leads to this question of, well, like, why isn't he doing more? Is he responsible for this? Whereas like when he's kind of just solving the mysteries and kind of helping where he can, it feels a bit more believable. I think looking back at some of those, the original version where there were kind of more three sides to the conflict and he's kind of less involved in supporting one over the other, that felt a bit more, I think that's kind of, we're talking about, is the story kind of baked too many times? That's where actually I think that made more sense. Like there being kind of all these kind of different disputes rather than Amir Bahama just seems like a good guy, Babalur seems like a bad guy, and then that plot is just kind of left to not resolve itself. I think it's better that it's in the background, but it is something that is jarring reading it now.
Do you agree with that, Ben?
Yeah, look, I think it's a bit of a subplot because it's not the real plot in terms of figuring out the oil and Dr. Muller's role and what have you, which comes into light a little bit further down the story. And I guess we see Abdullah and his father in later comics as well. So in terms of the continuity of the narrative, it kind of works. But yeah, look, at the end of the day, it's a subplot. It doesn't have to be the major plot. But I think it's all part of adding context to the scenery, the geopolitical area in that time and place, based on Hergé's research and the story itself. We've kind of got these lines blurring between realism and the imaginary land and Tintin, if you like.
Louisa, not a question per se, but here you go. I think this book is a misfit in the golden age of Tintin. Come at me.
Yes, I will come at them, and I will bring the ink gun because I absolutely defend this episode no matter what. And Precious Prankster Abdullah, black gold is gold, I think. Down to the Thompson and Thompson inclusion with the they don't get organ failure from this random formula. They turn into freaking aliens with bubbles and blue hair. There's nothing like this except maybe 714. It hints at some of this absurdity more so, but this I think Thompson and Thompson as well. The smugness of their expressions just takes them to a whole new level of comedy. I think, yeah, I will absolutely exchange blows with somebody over this. It is a golden age gold, black gold here for me.
I think for me, if we think about the Golden Age kind of beginning with The Secret of the Unicorn or Red Rackham's Treasure, what sets this apart in a really good way is that a lot of the other stories are in those double albums and they're kind of slow for bits, whereas this, I think, is a really kind of close to Calculus Affair and Red Sea Sharks, which are probably my favorites or among my favorites. It's a really tightly paced adventure. Like the comedy breaks with the Thompsons are just the right length before you get back to the action and the mystery with Tintin. So I think in many ways it's we all have different favorites, but I think in many ways this is better than some of those others that are kind of considered the Golden Age because it's quite different and distinct to them.
True that. Rohit, when I opened the doc this morning, I could have sworn you penciled in a 4 on 7 rating. Now I see 5. Care to clear that up for us?
Peer pressure.
Yeah. I thought 4 was a little bit unfair, and I did reread the book recently. I was like, no, it's got all the elements that make it a very enjoyable read, and it doesn't come together as slick in as slick a manner as I would have liked, but it's wonderful anyway. And like I said earlier, the part with Captain Haddock, I think that needed a bit of explanation as to how he got there. And even if you go, I'll go so far as to say that calculus suddenly, goes from being an inventor to finding a cure for the Thompsons and also the doctored petrol and everything. So it's like, is he suddenly an all-rounder that he can do everything? He can, and then later, obviously, he goes to the moon as well. And so, yeah, that's the reason why I initially gave it a 4, but I think it deserves a 5 out of 7 for me.
You know what? Let's meet halfway and give it a 4.5. Crystal Balls out of 7. It's not the first album that's got that rating either.
I have to say, Byron, when we first started this, I thought the idea of having a different person rate would be problematic because, well, it's all over the map, right? But I think it's actually more important to demonstrate how we each approach Tintin in our own way, and we take different things out of Tintin for ourselves based on our personalities or our interests or however our brains work. And it just shows, with Louise and I loving this one and Rohit thinking that it's okay, So again, I think it's important to demonstrate just how wide the appeal of Tintin really is, and how that we can just approach it as ourselves and take away from things as ourselves. So I think that's pretty cool.
Indeed, and that's what we'll keep doing for the rest of our run too. For now, that's a wrap on Land of Black Gold, a story born from multiple rewrites and decades of historical shifts, yet still delivering classic Tintin humor and desert-swept intrigue. Next up, we take a giant leap, literally, as Tintin's snowy Haddock and Calculus head for the stars in Destination Moon, the first half of Hergé's legendary space tour. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as we continue our journey with the Tintin podcast.